All right, we are live. Matt, thank you so much for coming to do this. I'm Todd Fahnestock, and this is Matt Dinniman. He's the creator of the Dungeon Crawler Carl. I can't even say it. Wow, Dungeon Crawler Carl phenomenon that has kind of been taking the world by storm. Is it? Are you the king of LitRPG, or maybe at the very least the bass player of LitRPG?
I don't really go for titles so much. I think people call me the crazy drunk uncle of LitRPG sometimes. I don't know how true that is. I'm just, the guy that writes Dungeon Crawler Carl of LitRPG.
All right. Well, I'm going to pump you up a little bit more as I've got 3 more bullet points here. I just pulled some of this stuff off the internet, so it could even be old. So it's at least this good. It might even be better. I read that you sold over 400,000 copies just for Dungeon Crawler Carl, and it seems like this whole thing is just kind of getting started. You have a newly minted trad publishing deal with Ace Books. Am I right about that?
Mm-hmm.
1 through 3.
Yeah.
For the series, and all kinds of interesting deals going on that you may or may not be able to talk about. So really cool stuff happening for you and this fabulous story that you have put out into the world. So on a personal note, I mean, I got to hang out with Matt a little bit at Superstars recently, and I think the coolest thing about Matt is that he's also just a really good guy. We went out to breakfast, and I think my favorite story about you so far is that there were several people at the table, and 2 of them were talking about really intense business stuff while you had like folded up a straw sheath and was like slowly dripping water on it and watching it kind of grow like one of those fireworks snakes. So that's one of my favorite moments, just kind of like thinking like, you know what, I think I'm going to like this guy because he's kind of thinking the same sort of things that I tend to be thinking when things veer into that kind of conversation. Anyways, thank you so much for being here. The purpose of this, essentially earlier this year, I wrote this book called Falling to Fly. It's just coming out. Today is the big launch day, which is one of the reasons we're doing all these interviews. And it centers around, it's called Falling to Fly, the book to read before you give up on your writing dreams. And I want to ask you 2 questions, an initial question and then a follow-up question that have to do with the writer's dream. So the first question is, when do you remember first wanting to be a writer? Like, what age were you? And what did you envision was like the ideal outcome for that? Like, I mean, to give you an example, for me, it was 14 and I wanted to be like the next Stephen King. I wanted, to not only inspire people with my stories, but also I wanted the money. I wanted the $300,000, trad publishing deal. I wanted the, nice house on the hill, all that stuff. That's like the writer's dream, capital D. Or what it was for me. And I've noticed that a lot of writers have sort of similar aspects of this dream. So the question is, when did that happen for you and what did yours look like?
Okay, so mine was pretty similar to yours. I was younger than you. I was probably around 8 or 9 years old. I decided that I was going to the library and by then I was getting, adult books. By adult, I mean like Louis L'Amour chapter books. And I was reading them cover to cover in the course of a day. And I knew right away that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a writer when I grew up. The problem was I sucked at writing. I would fail English class. My handwriting, I got kicked out of handwriting. I don't know if they still do that. You got
kicked out of the handwriting?
Yeah.
The cursive? When they taught
cursive?
The cursive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you can go
That's
fuck
awesome.
yourself, Mrs. Wilcox. But no. So I took those 2 things. I became a professional artist, and then I became a professional writer. So, and that's actually true. I always wanted to be a writer. I started writing short stories. In middle school is when I think I started the same way everyone else does, by writing like really crappy, cheesy poetry.
Yes, adolescent death poetry, we called it.
Exactly. And you shouldn't be embarrassed by that stuff. You should be embarrassed to show it, but you shouldn't be embarrassed by actually doing that sort of stuff, because it's part of the learning process, learning how to speak with your own voice. And in high school, I wrote several short stories. I would mail them off to try to get them published, and I never did. I never got anything published. Wasn't until college. My first story was published in a national magazine in April of 1999. And it was a gay men's magazine, and I had to pretend to be gay to do it. And which I'm not. And there's and it took me a few years after that to actually start to finish and sell my first novel. My first novel came out in 2003. So the other day I saw someone said that I was an overnight success. And I mean, Dungeon Crawler Carl didn't take off until the end of 2020, the beginning of 2021. So, I was a 22-year overnight success.
Overnight success. Yeah.
So, I mean, I've been writing a long time, and it was a long process. When I graduated from college, I don't have a degree in creative writing, but I did major in it for a while. So it's something, I wanted to do the trad route, just like you said. I wrote to agents, I wrote to publishers, I sent out stories dozens and dozens and dozens of times. I did get an agent long time ago that nothing ever happened from it, and it was for a different book. My first book was called The Shivered Sky, and I sent that out to a million agents. Nobody ever bid on that particular manuscript, so I sent it out to a bunch of publishers, and no one ever bid until a small one two. I sent to Bain, and then they never responded. And then I sent it to Silver Lake Publishing, which is a small, now long out of print sci-fi, and they liked it and they published it. And then about a year and a half after it was out, Bain wrote me back and said, "Hey, we really like this." This was literally like almost 3 years since I sent it to him. We really like this, but it's not right for us right now. But it was clear that it had actually gone through multiple people. And I was like, fuck, this publishing industry sucks.
So slow, right?
Right. It's so slow. And then I had, I was married and I had children. And so I kind of slowed down because I had a real job, multiple real jobs, but I didn't have time. I was working 40 plus hours a week, and writing a book is a lot of energy. So wasn't until right around 2010, 2011, I started writing again, pretty hardcore. And then I wrote another book, and that was published by Necro Publications, which is a well-known but small horror place. And I was like, well, this is great. It's a small indie publisher, but I never really made any money doing it. And that, the dream is, like you said, the giant advance, making an actual living from writing. And it wasn't until I self-published Dominion of Blades in 2017 did I actually start making 4 digits worth of money at a time. But 4 digits still isn't enough to live off of. So
right.
It wasn't until the pandemic happened. And at the time I was working for
myself. Do you mean for the year or like for the month kind of thing?
Yeah. No, this was for Dominion of Blades, probably. The book made 5 digits total the first year, but it was a low 5 digits, still not enough. Right. Like 4 digits a month. It did really well when it first came out, and then, like all indie books, they tend to slow down unless you have like momentum, and it didn't really have that much momentum. But it's still a great book. I'm going to finish that. It's a trilogy or quadrilogy. I don't know what the word is. What is the word for?
But somebody told me, I always say quadrology, but then it was pointed out to me that that's not right. It's something else. It's like pentology.
It's whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, probably. People get it. People understand what you're saying.
The trilogy plus one. Okay. But anyway, so that book did well, but it by indie standards back then, that book did really, really well, but still really well isn't making a living, especially when you have 4 kids and some are in college. And it wasn't until Dungeon Crawler Carl took off, and it was really because of the audiobook that it really took off, that I finally got to the point where lots of people are reading it. And it's even, and it's been ramping up, and it wasn't until the end of last year really where it was like really doing well. Then I started gaining interest. Like I did the whole thing backwards. I published an indie book, and then I had traditional publishers that were suddenly interested in a book that had already been published. So, and that's where I am today.
Yeah, yeah. So, so you said 6 years old, I think, was when you first started wanting to be a
It's
writer.
more like eight or nine.
8 or 9.
Yeah.
Okay. And then when you had that, like you talked about, I want the trad publishing contract, I mean, like, I think a lot of us want to write stories before we really think about what the material side of that dream is, right? So when do you
Right.
think it hit you that you were like, okay, I want the big advance, I want the accolades, I want to walk into a Barnes and Noble and have 150 people waiting for me to sign my book? I mean, these are the aspects, right? When did that start to hit you?
I never. I'm gonna lie if I say I don't like that stuff. It's cool, but I honestly can say with truth that what I really cared more about was getting people to actually read it, and all that other stuff is secondary. Even the money aspect of it, it's cool. It's great because that it means. But I like the money aspect more because it means I don't have to have a real job that takes away from writing, because that's what I really love to do. I like to tell stories.
Yeah.
And that whole idea of walking into a bookstore and seeing your book has always been the dream, right? And that still hasn't, it's never really happened to me, even at this point, except in like a couple random used bookstores. Like I've been in bookstores before, but I knew I was in that bookstore because they contacted me because it was an indie book, and it's a pain in the ass to get indie books in bookstores.
Yeah.
So this more recent stuff that's happening, it's cool to me because it's still not guaranteed it's going to be in bookstores, but it's a step closer. So
Absolutely.
that's really cool. And the idea of doing like readings or having signings for lots and lots of people, I'm terrified of doing signings because I'm always afraid no one's going to show up. I've done a few, and a couple people have shown up, so it's cool. But it's
I've been to those where you go and you sit behind the table and there's nobody there, and every now and then when somebody walks by and is like, "So, who are you? What do you do?" I mean, like, it's just the worst.
Can you tell me where the bathroom is?
Right. Yeah. Like, excuse me, and you're like with your pen, you're like ready to sign. They're like, "Where's the bathroom?" Yeah, it's over there. So you mentioned actually your trad publishing contract went backwards, and I think thinking about it in terms of like 1980s, 1990s mentality, that's absolutely true. But I don't know, like these days, it seems like I've seen more and more people who prove themselves in the indie area, and then there's interest. It's like, okay, you have an audience clearly, so now we're going to ramp up. We're going to, republish you in print and give you access to these venues that maybe you wouldn't have before. These other, selling venues that are, as you mentioned, more difficult for indie authors to get into. So I've been making little notes as you've been going through kind of this story, and these are the extra questions that get thrown in. I promised you 2 questions, and I gotta admit I was probably lying just right from the very beginning. There will be these other ones. So you said you were a creative writing major for a while. It doesn't sound like that's what you got your degree in, but for a while that's what you majored in. Am I correct about that? Okay,
that's correct. I changed my major like 7 times, I think.
I mean, I don't know you that well, but that doesn't surprise me at all. It just doesn't surprise me. So creative writing major. In the book Falling to Fly that I'm bringing out, there's a moment where I talk about academia and the kind of struggles that I have with it. So when you said that, my question to you is, your creative writing major, did it help you or did it hinder you? Like, what would you say about that?
This is a great question, and I have lots to say on this subject. So I think it did both. In a big way. It helped me in a big way, and it hurt me in a very big way. There's first off, before I say anything, you absolutely do not need a formal education to be a successful writer. Plenty of people, both trad and indie, never took a single class. However, there's 2 aspects to it, especially if you write genre fiction. in my personal experience, and this is both at the University of Arizona and like lots of community college style classes, they lean heavily towards the both pushing both trad publishing and pushing more literary style fiction, and that's and those two don't necessarily go hand in hand very well anyway, because literary tends to be difficult to sell unless you're really, really, really good at it. And then when you get super good at it, then the only people that'll publish you are literary college-based literary journals. But that's a whole other subject. I would in college you would do the workshops, and workshops where you would write a short story, and then you would send it to your class, and then you'd go in a circle, and then everyone would critique it. You would sit there, and you wouldn't be able to talk back into them until it's done. And then at the same time, you would end up doing the same thing to all your other classmates' stories. In those environments, in the college level, there was people who wrote genre fiction tended to get hammered down. I had one professor, I can't remember what she called it. I can't remember what she called genre fiction, but it was something really derogatory. And she would basically tell me, if you want to pass this class, you can't write about aliens, you can't write about demons, you have to write about basically the human condition. That's real fiction. That's where true fiction lies. And when you're in an environment where that's where everyone thinks and acts, it tends to make you think that way. And there's nothing wrong with literary fiction. Some of the greatest writers in the world are very literary style fiction. The person who I think is the greatest writing instructor she writes literary fiction. And it's great. It's amazing for the art of writing. And that's kind of where the good part of it is. You learn a lot about voice. You learn a lot about character. You learn a lot about the actual art of it. But it's such a dangerous environment to do it in, because it's really easy to fall down that cliff and then, spend your life not making any money writing the most beautiful pieces of work you've ever seen. And also, I would recommend any writer to get themselves into a writing workshop. I learned more about writing by critiquing other people's work than I ever learned about having my own work critiqued. It's crucial to be able to read other people's stuff and to see why it doesn't work, and to sit in a room with other writers who have similar and different things to say about that same third person's work. It's one of the most amazing, fast ways to teach yourself how to look at your own work from like a third party's point of view. Being self-aware of how your own writing is the single most difficult, single most important skill
for sure
as a writer you can learn. And those writing workshops, and it doesn't have to be at a college, but most community colleges will have one, is like the speed method of learning that skill. So
yeah.
That's my long, convoluted answer to your
I love it. I had a feeling that this one, when we're supposed to be for 20 minutes, I'm like, yeah, once Matt gets up there, I'm going to want to ask him questions, and we're going to go for a lot longer. So I'm going to start to round it out now. But one of the things that I wanted to end with is the second part of the question. So I asked you about what your dream was in the beginning. So how has it changed? So now you're here, and some would say you're, if not at the top of the heap, at a peak for sure with the success of Dungeon Crawler Carl. And so how is the dream? How does it look?
You're starting to cut out, and now you're frozen. I don't know if I'm live.
Oh no. But, am I back now?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so the question is, how has the dream changed?
Yeah.
Is that the question? Okay.
Yes.
Well, it's funny because I keep moving the goalposts. My first back, if you fall back about 10 years from that, my goal was to write another book, because I hadn't written a book in a while. And then I did that, and then get someone to buy it. And I didn't get anybody to buy it, so I self-published it. But when I self-published Dominion of Blades, even though it didn't make that much money, I made more money in the first day self-publishing Dominion Blades than I ever made all of my writing career up until that point. So, and it was cool. And so I thought I'd, hit the peak. I'd written a book and then made money. And side note, way back in 1990, like I was a kid, I went to a book signing from a pretty famous author at a Walden, or I think it was a Walden Books at the mall.
Walden Books?
Yeah. And he was sitting there. For the life of me, I can't remember. I keep wanting to say it's Robert R. McCammon, but it's not, because Robert R. McCammon is one of my favorite authors, but it wasn't him. But it was a horror author, and I can't remember who it was, but it's pretty popular at the time. It wasn't like Stephen King or anything. I was talking to him, and I got a copy of the book, and I don't remember which book it is, and I can't find it. And he signed it, and I said, "Oh, are you doing are you going to be touring? Are you going to like Phoenix next?" And he's like, "No, I have to go back to work on Monday," he said to me. And I don't know why, but that just like rocked my world at the time, because he was a famous author, and the fact that he had a real, like a day job in addition to being writing, and even though he was a New York Times bestselling author, it just blew my mind. And so my goal had always been since then to be able to make a living off of it. And I do now. I make a living, and it's great. And hopefully it can last. But in this particular genre, it's sink or swim. You're only as good as your last book. So
it might not just be that genre. I mean, it might be all genres.
No, it's true. It's true. There's not very many people can write To Kill a Mockingbird and then never have to write another book.
Right.
But that's good, because I like writing. I like writing books, so at least I'll always have a shot. And another side note is I make more money this year off of Dominion of Blades and all my other books than I did the year it came out. So that's a good thing about having a big backlist. If you have one book that takes off, all of your backlist suddenly becomes hot. People suddenly, if they really like you, they want to read your other stuff, and that's been really helpful for me too. So awesome. My goal was to make a living, and then from there it changed to a bunch of other stuff I dare not even say out loud because I don't want to jinx it.
Fair enough. All right, so I'm going to round this out. So last question I want to ask you is for the readers that are out. I mean, like the writers that are out there. I imagine we're going to get quite a few writers that are watching this, and some of them, like I said, there's the mountain, and some of them are here, and some of them are here, and some of them are close to the top. I mean, but no matter where they are in that climb of the mountain, I think hearing what you would have to say about the dream, like if you had to say somebody about this writer's dream, say to somebody something about this writer's dream, what would you say to them? Like what, like as far as because a lot of writers meet with great discouragement. I'm sure you have done that. Frustration, discouragement, doors slammed in your face, falling down when you're trying to fly. All this stuff happens. What do you say to people who are experiencing, say, frustration right now in regards to this dream?
It's so much easier to stick with it if you're writing something you like to write. I see so many people that are chasing money by writing to market, and they're writing things that they wouldn't normally read or enjoy writing, and then they don't necessarily become successful despite that. And it's so discouraging. So if you write what you love, then getting the dream is almost secondary to making money, getting tons of readers, selling 3 times as many books as you suggested I had sold at the beginning of this. It's so much sweeter when it's something that you enjoyed writing. So as long as you're doing something you like doing, then it doesn't matter if your first attempt, second attempt, third attempt, fourth attempt isn't that successful. It took me a long, long time to become self-sustaining as a writer. And I am very, very fortunate. I understand that. I know that. just because you write a good book doesn't mean lots of people are going to read it. But
Right.
if you write a bad book, it's so much harder. And it's, if you're not passionate about what you're doing, or you're not writing in a genre you normally would write, then it's a disservice to everybody. I think yourself, the readers, and all that stuff. So my advice is, as long as you're writing something you enjoy writing, then, you know, just keep at it.
You win no matter what. Whether you make the money or not, you're still winning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can always learn how to rob a bank and stuff. I mean, that
was all right. So last, tell them where they can find you. I mean, I think that, oh, see, and look, your high five buddy is already on that. Becca's already putting it up there.
High five, Becca.
You know, I'm sure she tells you that she appreciates those high fives, but you don't know just how much she appreciates them. I mean, she is getting me every single time. She was deprived of high fives, I think, back in high school, and now there's just, the hole is so deep it's never going to be able to be filled. So every high five helps.
If you see Becca on the street, just hold up your hand and she'll slap it.
Yep, and she will happily give you a high five. So this is where we can find you. Any other thing, any other place that we should direct people to?
The Patreon is good. Amazon's good. There's going to be a cover reveal tomorrow. That's breaking news.
Oh wow, where can we find this?
Reactor magazine, I think Reactor Lit will have it. It's me. I'm gonna spam it all over the place. It's a cover reveal for the Ace edition of Dungeon Crawler Carl 1. We're still working on Dungeon Crawler Carl 7 cover, and hopefully I should have that in the next month or so. But this is what the actual hardcover books that are going to be able to be purchased in stores will look like. It's very different. I think it's going to be pretty cool too.
Outstanding. Well, Matt, once again, thank you so much for taking time out to come and do this and answer these questions. I think writers will find it very helpful. I mean, getting an inside view of kind of your journey and the different things that happen. I mean, even though it was just the barest little glimpse, is going to be super helpful for people. Thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.